Maharaj kept staring at Shivangi after hearing her words. There was no particular expression on his face, but a slight surprise was definitely visible in his eyes. He felt something different about her, as if this Shivangi standing in front of him was not the same as before. But he could not understand what that change was. He was still lost in his thoughts when Shivangi's voice echoed again, drawing his attention back to her. Shivangi said in a calm voice, "Maharaj, please forgive us. We know that our presence wastes your precious time, and for that, we apologize. However, we have now decided that we will correct this mistake. From today, we will not come to trouble you." Saying this, she fell silent. An odd silence filled the room for a few moments. The breeze coming from outside gently swayed the curtains, while the atmosphere inside felt heavier than before. Maharaj found her words strange, but he said nothing. He wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. Finally, he just said, and pretended to read his papers. Shivangi looked at him for a moment. There was no complaint in her eyes, no anger either, just a strange calmness. Then, in a composed tone, she said, "We came here only to deliver these papers. Yadav-ji said that these are very important documents, so we had to hand them over to you." Saying this, she placed the papers in front of Maharaj and bowed her head politely, saying, "Once again, please forgive us for our mistake. We will ensure that we do not waste your precious time in the future. Now, please allow us to leave." Saying this, she turned around and left without saying another word. Maharaj's ears were ringing with Shivangi's words. Her calling him Maharaj bothered him, as until now she had always addressed him as Pitaji. But today she had referred to him as Maharaj. Her words, her changed behavior. For some reason, all of this made Maharaj a little sad. Shivangi's cold and formal demeanor did not sit well with him. In fact, a strange pain was rising in his heart, a pain that he could not even understand himself. But he shook his head without saying anything and tried to immerse himself in work. On the other hand, Shivangi was walking towards her room. The soft sound of her footsteps echoed in the long corridors of the palace. Just then, she saw some maidens sitting together and laughing. They kept looking at something in a book, laughing repeatedly, and then excitedly talking among themselves. Seeing this, Shivangi felt curious and walked towards them. As soon as she reached there, she asked, "What are you all doing? Please tell us." But as soon as the maidens turned around and saw Shivangi standing in front of them, they panicked. The color drained from their faces. They immediately stood up, hid the book, bowed their heads, and began to apologize repeatedly. Then, without saying anything, they almost ran away from there. Seeing their reaction, Shivangi felt sad. She stood there for a few moments. Her gaze was fixed in the direction from which the maidens had just fled. The fear clearly visible on their faces left a strange ache in her heart. But she knew that all of this was the result of her own cold and harsh behavior. People had started to fear even talking to her. Thinking about this, she felt disheartened and slowly walked towards her room. Upon reaching her room, Shivangi changed her clothes and then went to sit on the swing by the window. A gentle breeze was blowing outside. The flowers in the garden were swaying with the wind, but she did not feel drawn to those beautiful sights. She began to think about the events of the past, how she had always been immersed in studies and practice, how she had not made friends with anyone. If any maid would stop working to do something else, she would immediately scold her and remind her of the rules. How she had never gone outside, always stayed in the palace. How she learned new things every day to attract her father's attention. Yet it had not helped at all. Slowly, everyone had distanced themselves from her. At that time, all of this seemed normal to her. But today, looking back, she realized that she had unknowingly built a wall of loneliness around herself. She had always been alone. That was why she always hesitated to talk to or befriend anyone. There was not a single true friend in her past life. This was what Priya had exploited for her own benefit, winning people's hearts and inciting everyone against her. Thinking about all this, she began to feel angry with herself. Her fingers had tightly gripped the swing's rope, but this time, nothing like that would happen. She made a firm resolve in her mind. She would correct all her mistakes, make new friends, and leave this place as soon as possible. Thinking about all this, there was a different sparkle in her eyes. This sparkle was of hope. It was of change. And it was of a new beginning. Just then, a maid entered the room. She had tea and some snacks in her hands. She came in, bowed to the princess, and began to serve the tea. The princess sat quietly in her chair and looked at the maid. She was very young. Perhaps she had just started working in the palace. Innocence was clearly visible on her face, but so was the nervousness of being in front of the princess. So, the princess casually asked, "What is your name?" Hearing the princess's question, the maid panicked. She did not know how to respond. She stood there with her head bowed, then timidly said, "My name is Neela, princess. Have we made any mistake? Will you punish us?" Upon hearing this, the princess felt immense regret for her previous behavior. She realized that the people in the palace thought of punishment and anger first when they saw her, not warmth or respect. But she said with a sweet smile, "No, I just asked casually." Her voice was much softer and more affectionate than before. Then she asked casually, "What do you do in your free time when you have no work?" Neela was taken aback by this question. Perhaps she did not expect the princess to talk to her in such a normal way. Then she slowly replied, "I do farming. I read books, and I talk with my friends. Sometimes I also go out for a walk." After saying all this, she became a little more comfortable. The princess asked with a slight smile, "What kind of books do you read?" Excitement lit up Neela's face. She happily said, "I read short stories, like love stories, tales of warriors, plays, and humorous jokes." The princess thought for a while. Curiosity was clearly visible in her eyes. Then, with great politeness and innocence, she said, "Could you bring us such books too?" Hearing the princess's soft and affectionate tone, Neela was taken aback. She shyly asked, "You? You will also read such stories?" The princess nodded slightly, saying yes. Upon hearing this, a slight happiness flickered on Neela's face. "All right, I will bring you some storybooks tomorrow." The princess smiled and said very politely, "Thank you, Neela." Seeing the princess talk with such warmth, Neela's nervousness gradually began to fade. Now she started to talk a little more comfortably and began to answer every question from the princess. The atmosphere in the room, which had been formal and tense just a while ago, now felt much lighter and more relaxed. For a while, both of them engaged in casual conversation. Neither of them realized how time passed. For the first time, the princess was talking to someone so casually, without any formalities or rules. The princess took a sip of tea, looked at Neela, and smiled, saying, "You made the tea very well. We liked it." Hearing this, Neela bowed with joy. Pride and happiness were clearly visible on her face. Perhaps for the first time, someone had appreciated her work in this way. Then, while sipping tea, the princess suddenly paused. Her smile gradually faded. She looked slowly at Neela, then lowered her gaze. It seemed as if she wanted to say something, but the words were hesitant to come out. After a few moments of silence, she asked in a hesitant voice, "Will you be our friend?" There was a slight hesitation in her voice as she said this, as if she herself was afraid that the other person might refuse her. Hearing the princess's words, Neela was astonished. She could not understand what to reply. It felt as if her ears had misheard something. So she did not respond. She just stood there like a statue, looking at the princess in surprise with her big eyes. Silence filled the room for a few moments. The princess looked at her. Seeing the expression on her face, she understood what she was thinking. This made the princess a little sad. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed slightly. Then she began to speak in a soft voice. "We have no friends. We do not know how to make friends. Before today, we never tried to befriend anyone or even talk to ourselves. That is why no one likes to talk to us, and those who do feel shy around us. But now we also want to be friends with everyone, to talk to everyone. But we do not understand how to do that. We tried yesterday, but we scared them again." As she said this, the princess's voice became heavy. Disappointment and embarrassment were both reflected in her eyes. It seemed as if emotions that had been suppressed for years were finally taking the form of words. Listening to the princess's words, Neela began to understand a little. She realized how lonely this princess, who appeared hard from the outside, was from within. Then she shyly said, Would you like to be friends with someone like us? I mean, you should befriend someone of your own status. Would it be right for a maid and a princess to become friends? As soon as Neela said this, a slight sparkle appeared in the princess's eyes, as if she had seen a ray of hope. She immediately took Neela's hand and pulled her closer. Then, smiling, she said, "In friendship, none of this matters, right? As far as we know, friendship is what is done from the heart, where there is no selfishness, where one cares for the other without any motive. There is no distinction of high or low, princess or maid. Only friendship is seen in it. That is true friendship." While saying this, the princess still held Neela's hand firmly, as if she were afraid she might run away. The truth was clearly visible in her eyes. Hearing the princess's words, Neela's eyes became slightly moist. The hesitation in her heart began to gradually break down. She slowly nodded her head and said, "Yes." As soon as she saw this, a wave of happiness swept across the princess's face. She eagerly asked once again, "So tell me, will you be our friend?" Neela shook her head again, and this time, the princess hugged her tightly. True happiness, which had been absent for years, was reflected on their faces. She thanked her joyfully, while Neela was still in shock. She couldn't believe that the princess of the state considered her a friend. But soon she composed herself and hugged the princess back. After a while, when they separated, a big smile was on the princess's face. Their faces were glowing. It seemed as if a great emptiness in their lives had been filled a little today. Neela said to the princess, "Now we will leave, but we will definitely bring books for you tomorrow." She said this happily. There was no trace of her earlier nervousness in her voice. Now there was warmth in it. The princess nodded with a slight smile, and Neela happily left. Even after the door was closed, the smile remained on the princess's face. She gently looked at her hands, as if she was still feeling the essence of her first friendship. There was a strange warmth in her heart, a feeling she had never experienced before. As soon as Neela reached her room, this room was made for the maids to live in, where all the maids could stay together. There was a hustle and bustle inside the room. Some maids were resting after returning from their work, while others were sitting together and chatting. Soft laughter could be heard from somewhere, and discussions about the day's fatigue were happening elsewhere. When Neela arrived there, she saw that other maids were sitting together and talking. A slight smile was still on her face. She went straight to a maid, Sona, and said, "We need some books. Can we go out and get them tomorrow?" "We need them tomorrow." Sona looked at her in surprise. She couldn't understand why Neela suddenly needed books. She asked curiously, "But what kind of books do you need? If we have them, we will definitely give them." Neela said with a slight smile, "Not for us. These books are for the princess." As soon as Neela finished her sentence, all the maids' mouths fell open in shock. A sudden silence fell in the room. The maids, who had been busy in their own conversations, also started looking at Neela. Their eyes widened in astonishment. Sona asked in disbelief, "Are you not mistaken? The princess asked for storybooks? Not history, warfare, or any old books?" Her tone was so filled with surprise that the other maids began to nod in agreement. Neela smiled lightly. Then she told everyone everything that had happened with the princess. She explained how the princess had asked her name, how they had talked about ordinary things, how she had expressed a desire to read storybooks, and how she had talked about being friends. As Neela recounted everything, the expressions of all the maids present began to change. The harsh image of the princess they had in their minds slowly started to break. Hearing her words, it didn't take long for everyone to understand how lonely the princess felt. They realized that perhaps they had never tried to understand the princess. They felt regret for their past behavior. But now everyone had resolved to treat the princess better. They would try to understand her. But they were still secretly afraid of the princess's anger and punishment. Years of fear could not vanish in a day. Still, in their hearts, there was no longer the same fear of the princess, but a little sympathy had also developed. The next morning, the golden rays of the sun had spread throughout the palace. The courtyards of the palace were bustling with activity. Neela and Sona went to the city and brought back a lot of books. They chose different types of stories: love stories, thrilling tales, sagas of brave warriors, humorous stories, and many interesting plays. Neither of them knew which story the princess would like, so they took a variety of books. When Neela was going to serve breakfast to the princess, She took the books along. Holding the books carefully, she hurried towards the princess's room. She reached near the princess's room, then gently knocked on the door and went inside. Inside, the princess was sitting by the window, looking out at the view. There was no book in her lap, but it seemed like she was lost in deep thought. As soon as she turned around and saw Neela entering the room, her eyes lit up. A smile instantly appeared on her face. She quickly got up and stood next to Neela. Neela bowed and handed the books to the princess. The princess was extremely happy to see the books. A childlike sparkle appeared in her eyes. Without thinking, she hugged Neela tightly. This time, Neela was not as surprised as before. A smile also appeared on her face. After that, the princess began to have breakfast. In between, she asked Neela about the books, and Neela happily answered every question. Which story is the most fun? Which is the most popular? Which book has the best hero? Neela enthusiastically kept explaining everything. Listening to her, the princess became even more interested in the books. Time passed, and the atmosphere in the room became more lively and cheerful than before. After finishing breakfast, Neela left, but as she left, she couldn't help but feel that the princess was truly changing. And perhaps, this change was going to prove to be a new beginning, not just for her, but for the entire palace. As soon as Neela left, once again, silence fell in the room. Just moments ago, the room had been filled with conversation and soft laughter. But now, only the sound of the cool breeze coming through the window could be heard. The princess slowly began to look at the books. Her fingers were gliding over the cover of each book, as if she were touching not just the books, but a new beginning in her life. For a few moments, she quietly gazed at them. Then she said to herself, "How foolish we were, never thought about ourselves, always remained alone, had no friends. We always tried to make others happy, and because of that, we isolated ourselves the most. We didn't even realize how lonely we had become, and Priya had taken advantage of this." Many memories of the past began to float before her eyes. Those days when she would be immersed in studying and practicing for hours. Those moments when she tried to constantly improve herself just to receive a small praise from her father. Those opportunities when people wanted to come to her, but she herself had created distance between herself and others. And then, Priya, who had won people's hearts while she had remained alone, who had recognized her weaknesses and used them. The princess slowly clenched her fists. For a moment, pain appeared on her face, but in the next moment, it turned into determination. But this time, it will not happen. This thought was clearer in her mind than ever before. She was not going to repeat her old mistakes. As she thought this, her eyes became slightly moist. A few tears lingered on her eyelashes. But this time, those tears held not just sorrow. They held hope. They held courage. And most importantly, they held a firm resolve to move forward. She was no longer the old Shivangi. She wanted to change. She wanted to understand people. She wanted to make friends. And most importantly, she wanted to learn to live for herself. The cool breeze coming through the window was touching her face. Sweet sounds of birds could be heard from the distant garden. The soft rays of the sun were scattering in the room and shining on the books placed in front of her like a treasure. The books in front of her were signaling a new beginning, a beginning where she would learn to live not just as a princess, but as an ordinary girl. A life where there would be not just duty, but friendship, laughter, warmth, and perhaps happiness too. But would this new friendship be able to bring Princess Shivangi out of loneliness? Or does it hint at a new conspiracy? Why did the princess now feel the need for change in her life? Could this change truly alter her destiny? After all, how was Shivangi, who had never mingled with anyone, now preparing to include new people in her world? And the biggest question, would Priya sit quietly, or would she once again try to snatch Shivangi's new happiness away? Behind the quiet walls of the palace, many secrets were still hidden. Many untold truths were yet to come to light. And this new chapter of Shivangi's life had just begun. To know more, read the next chapter.